on a relative basis, yes, I've had it all. Okay, on a relative basis, I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful husband, 2 great kids, a very tight-knit family, and an awesome job with a great team. But you know, to get here and to stay here, I mean, lots of trade-offs, lots of sacrifices, you know, under the water, a lot of collateral damage. But I think somehow I've had the strength to power through all of that. Can you have it all? That's the big question in this definition. I think if you have the right support system, if you have an understanding spouse, if you want to be married, and if you're willing to make all the trade-offs that you need to make, you can have it all. But while you do all that, there will be heartache, there will be pain, there will be some collateral damage underneath the surface. You've got to live with it. As millennials have come into the workforce in large numbers, their expectations of companies have changed. They no longer look at it as sort of a paycheck, but they look at it as, how can I go to work and make a difference in society? So the notion of purpose is becoming a much bigger factor. The big difference is that in the past, purpose used to be some sort of a corporate social responsibility program. And typically those programs were good, people liked them, but they were at the whim or fancy of the CEO who was there. So if the CEO retired, that program got cut. So we had to weave purpose into the core business model of the company. How do you make sure that the sense of purpose can only be accomplished if you make profits? And the only way to make profits is through purpose. And that's why we use the term performance with purpose, linking both together. And I think that's what's excited millennials in particular, and what's excited the boomers to even stay longer in the workforce, because they actually feel they're contributing to the future of society as opposed to walking in, picking a paycheck and leaving. The bolder we can be, the better. The more we can break the rules, the better off we're going to be, because you know, the world is full of ideas today. And if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. In fact, I'd say little startups are capturing a lot of the growth today, even in our space, even in the food and beverage space. So in many ways, in our company, we have to act as if we are a bunch of little startups. And that's what we are, a bunch of little startups. So in order to do that, we've got to allow people to be bold, you know, write the rules any way they want. And that's what they're doing in our company.
I remember very clearly 6 or 7 years ago when you started pushing Pepsi in the direction of healthy foods, and you got hammered by some of your shareholders saying, you know, focus on profits. If you're making more money off of the sugary soft drinks, don't get caught up in political correctness. That was a pretty tough time for you.
Yeah, I mean, what would they say today?
Well, now it looks okay. But that requires a 7-year focus. They were looking quarter to quarter.
No, you're right, Alan. I think every issue we are facing today is long-term in nature and requires systematic solutions. When we have political cycles that are short-term in nature and investors who are short-term in nature. So the question is, who is going to address these issues? We're looking at everything through a microscope, and we've got to look at a microscope and a telescope. From my perspective, that is the only strategy I knew, and that's the only strategy I know. If my board, my investors didn't like that, I wouldn't be sitting here with you today. But I was very comfortable that that was the only way the company should go, because I was looking at the consumer data, I was looking at societal data, and I realized that our strategy to shift the portfolio, becoming more environmentally conscious and creating an environment that was good for our employees, was the only shareholder value creating strategy in the long term.
Love to know what skills or experiences Indra would suggest as essential for future leaders.
Oh, great question. I've always talked about my 5 C's model, and let me talk about them again. The first is competency. I think anybody who wants to be a future leader should have a hip pocket skill that everybody looks at and says XYZ is the go-to person for that skill. Because unless you're really known for something and not just as a generalist, you don't stand out from the pack. But in order to be competent at something, you've got to be a lifelong student, because you've got to constantly refine your knowledge of that subject so that you remain ahead and abreast of everything that goes on in that field first. The second, I'd say, is courage and confidence. It's a pair. You can be very, very competent, but if you're not willing to speak out, if you're not willing to have the confidence based on your knowledge, what's the point, right? You just roll over. So courage and confidence are very important. The third is communication skills. You cannot overinvest in communication skills, written and oral communications, because as a leader, you constantly have to mobilize the troops. I can tell you, when I first came to the United States, I used to debate and I used to be on debating teams, but I used to speak so fast because culturally I grew up in an environment where people spoke very fast. Fortunately, Yale had a requirement that unless you passed the communications course, you couldn't graduate from the first year to the second year in business school. I flunked the first time I took the communications course. So over summer, I took it again, which was the best thing that happened, because I learned to sync my brain with my output from my mouth, and so I started to slow down what I was saying. Huge difference. So I'd encourage all of you, invest in communication skills, critically important. The fourth skill I'd say is consistency. It's important that leaders are consistent. You can change your mind, but change your mind against a consistent framework, because if you're not consistent, people are always second guessing what you're doing. So be consistent. And the last skill is your compass. Integrity is critical in this job. You can be competent, you can be courageous, have confidence, be a great communicator, be consistent. But if you don't have integrity, that compass doesn't point true north, everything comes crashing down, as we've seen in recent times. So again, it's the 5C model, and that's what I've operated against for all my life. Throw your head, heart, and hands into it. I look at my job not as a job, I look at it as a calling, as a passion. And I don't care about the hours, I don't care about the hardship, because to me, everything is a joy. So whatever you do, please look upon it as a calling and a passion, not as a job, not as something temporary. So whatever you do, please look upon it as a calling and a passion, not as a job, not as something temporary. So whatever you do, please look upon it as a calling and a passion, not as a job, not as something temporary.